whispered history in the stillness of time. The air in ancient Macedonia was cool and still. In the hills near the town of Pella, a faint breeze drifted across stone courtyards and open fields, carrying the sound of distant sheep and the soft murmuring of water. It was here, around the year 356 BCE, that a boy named Alexander was born, a child who would one day conquer half the known world. But tonight, his story unfolds not with battle cries, but with the quiet rustle of time. His father was King Philip II, a man of ambition and iron discipline, whose eyes saw not the small kingdom he ruled, but the great empire it could become. His mother, Queen Olympias, came from Epirus, a land of misty mountains and ancient myths. She was proud, spiritual, and believed her son was destined for greatness. Some whispered that Alexander's true father was Zeus himself, for she told tales of lightning and divine dreams. But those are stories, and in history the child simply slept, small, silent, the flickering torchlight of the palace casting gentle shadows across his face. When he was still a boy, Alexander was restless. He learned to ride before most could walk a steady path. He tamed a wild horse, a great black creature named Bucephalus. The others feared it. It snorted, stamped, and bit. But Alexander noticed that the horse was afraid of its own shadow. So he turned it toward the sun, and it calmed. His father, Philip, watched with quiet astonishment and said, "My boy, you must find a kingdom worthy of you, for Macedonia will not be enough." Those words lingered in the boy's mind like a slow echo through marble halls. Years passed. The tutors came and went, but one stayed in history's light: Aristotle, the philosopher of reason and wonder. He taught Alexander not just about war or politics, but about the stars, the soul, the nature of men. They walked beneath olive trees, and Aristotle spoke softly about moderation, virtue, and the golden mean. Alexander listened, though in his heart he already dreamed of glory, of lands beyond the horizon, of his name spoken across deserts and seas.
Still, for now he was a student, and the days in Pella were long and gentle. The bees hummed, scrolls of parchment rustled. The soft sound of a reed pen dipped in ink marked time. Then came the years of his father's rise. Philip united the Greek states one by one, through diplomacy, through force, through gold and sword alike. He created an army of unmatched precision, men who fought shoulder to shoulder with long spears, called sarissas, that bristled like the spines of a great beast. Alexander watched, learned, and sometimes led small commands in battle, feeling the strange mix of fear and excitement that came with war. But history moves slowly when you listen to it like this, like water flowing through your thoughts as you drift toward rest. The noise of battles fades, the clashing of metal dulls to a distant hum, and you can almost hear the steady breathing of the ancient world, asleep beneath the stars. Philip's ambitions grew. He planned to lead a great campaign into Persia, the vast empire across the sea, ruled by King Darius III. Yet, before he could march, fate turned. During a festival, amid laughter and music, Philip was struck down, assassinated by one of his own guards. The reasons remain uncertain: jealousy, politics, love, betrayal. But the result was clear. The young Alexander, only 20 years old, became king of Macedonia.
It was not a calm beginning. Rivals rose up. The Greek cities whispered rebellion. The throne shook with doubt. But Alexander moved swiftly, decisively, not yet the conqueror of legends, but already the man of action. He rode south to Thebes, the proud city that dared defy him. Within days its walls fell, and when it was over, Thebes was destroyed, its people scattered, its buildings burned, its name a warning. Then silence again, and through that silence the rest of Greece bowed its head. From then, his path stretched eastward, toward Persia, toward the world beyond the known. But before that, there were still quiet nights in Macedonia. Nights where the young king would walk alone through the palace courtyards, listening to the soft sound of his sandals against stone, and look up at the same stars Aristotle had spoken of. Perhaps he wondered, even then, whether greatness was worth its cost. The spring came. The army gathered, 30,000 infantry, 5,000 horsemen, men from every corner of Greece. They crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Europe and Asia, where Alexander paused and threw a spear into the soil, declaring it his claim. The journey had begun. The first great test awaited, the Battle of Granicus. The Persian satraps, local governors, gathered their forces. The river was deep, the banks steep. Most generals advised waiting, but Alexander refused. He charged across the water, the current tugging at the horse's legs, arrows darkening the sky. He fought at the front, always visible, his helmet shining like a beacon. He was nearly struck down, saved only by a loyal soldier's blade. When it ended, the Persians fled. The first victory was his. And yet, as night fell, he did not celebrate loudly. He ordered the burial of the fallen, friend and foe alike. He moved among the rows of men, silent, his armor still marked by blood and dust. The torches flickered. Somewhere an owl called from the dark. The air was cool again, like the night of his birth. As he lay in his tent, perhaps his mind drifted to Aristotle's lessons, to his father's words, to his mother's fierce prophecies. The stars above Asia shone differently than those of Greece, but they were the same lights that guided sailors and shepherds since time began. And for a moment, even Alexander the Great was just another man beneath them, a boy grown into destiny, breathing softly, half dreaming of what was still to come. And so the night passes slowly, the river quiets, the horses rest, the torches fade to embers, and the conqueror of the world sleeps, for the world is still waiting. The march through Asia. The morning light came softly through the camp. Mist hung over the tents, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the faint smoke of last night's fires. Alexander rose early, as he always did. He was not one to sleep long, even when the world around him still dreamed. Outside, horses stirred, men murmured, and the first sound of armor being fastened echoed like a ritual of dawn. They were now across the Hellespont, no longer in Greece, but in Asia Minor. A new world stretched before them, filled with cities, mountains, and empires. Each day they marched under the wide sky. The sun grew hotter, the land drier, the roads longer. Still the army followed, bound not only by loyalty, but by the strange energy that Alexander carried, an energy that felt like fate itself. He visited the ancient city of Troy, where the old heroes of myth once fought: Achilles, Hector, and the warriors sung by Homer. He laid a wreath upon the tomb of Achilles, the warrior he admired most. He whispered softly, "Bless me, great Achilles, for I too seek glory." But in the quiet of that morning, the sea only sighed, and the wind moved through the grass like a slow breath of memory. From Troy he turned east. Each village that opened its gates was spared. Those that resisted were subdued. But his rule was not cruelty. It was a strange blend of conquest and curiosity. He asked questions, studied customs, and often sat with local priests to learn their ways. He wanted not just to rule the world, he wanted to understand it. Then came the Battle of Issus, a narrow plain between sea and mountain. There the full might of Persia awaited him. King Darius III, with an army said to number hundreds of thousands. The winds off the sea carried the smell of salt and metal. When the two sides met, the sound was like thunder. Spears struck shields, horses screamed, but even through the chaos, Alexander rode ahead, his white-plumed helmet glinting through dust. He charged straight toward Darius, and the great king, seeing him, turned his chariot and fled. The battle ended as quickly as it began. The Persians broke. Their treasures, tents, and even the family of Darius, his mother, wife, and daughters, fell into Alexander's hands. But what happened next was not cruelty. He treated them with respect, bowing to them as royal women, promising their safety. He spoke gently, assuring them that Darius still lived. And the Persian queen mother, who had feared humiliation, wept with relief. In that moment, even the conqueror's shadow softened. As the army rested, Alexander walked the silent field of Issus at night. The moon hung low, pale over the corpses and broken chariots. He said nothing, only looked out toward the east, where Darius had fled, where the empire still waited. The wind rustled the banners, and the ocean murmured somewhere beyond the hills. The next months were long and weary. The army moved through Syria and Phoenicia, where the great cities lay along the coast. Most surrendered peacefully, except one, Tyre, an island city, proud and strong, surrounded by walls and waves. Its towers gleamed in the sun like ivory. Alexander wanted Tyre, not just for strategy, but for the symbolism of power over the sea. But Tyre refused him entry, so he built a causeway, a road of stone and wood stretching from the mainland to the island itself. It took 7 long months, under arrows, fire, and storms. The sound of hammers, of men shouting, of stones falling into the sea filled the air day after day. Slowly, the causeway grew, a bridge between will and defiance. When the walls finally fell, Tyre burned. The army entered quietly, weary more than victorious. The sea glowed with reflected flames, and the night was still except for the soft crackle of fire. Alexander stood upon the shore, the wind pulling at his cloak. He said nothing. He simply watched the horizon. Soon after, in the land of Egypt, the people welcomed him as a liberator. They had long resented Persian rule. In Memphis, he was crowned Pharaoh of Egypt, son of Amun-Ra, the sun god. He walked among temples older than memory, carved with hieroglyphs and gods with the heads of falcons and jackals. He listened to priests recite prayers in ancient tongues. The air was thick with incense and sand, the sound of the Nile flowing steadily nearby. In the desert west of Egypt, he made a strange and sacred journey to the Oracle of Siwa, deep among shifting dunes. Few dared travel there, but Alexander insisted. The heat was immense. The wind carried sand in swirling ghosts. For days they rode, until at last, in the stillness of a hidden oasis, the priests of the oracle received him. No one knows what was said, but when Alexander emerged, his face was calm, almost serene. He claimed the oracle had called him the son of Zeus Ammon, confirming his mother's old belief. Perhaps he believed it too. Perhaps he simply understood that legends can be more powerful than truth. After Egypt, his march turned north again, toward Mesopotamia, toward the heart of Persia itself. The rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates shimmered in the distance like threads of light through dust. The air was dry, the land endless. Each day was a mirror of the one before, the slow trudge of soldiers, the creak of carts, the hum of flies under the sun. But within Alexander burned a purpose that never dimmed. He was chasing Darius, and through Darius, destiny itself. At last, near the plains of Gaugamela, the two armies met once more. The Persians had gathered everything: chariots with blades on their wheels, war elephants, tens of thousands of men. The ground trembled as they moved. Alexander studied the field, marking each rise and hollow, every line of defense. Then, quietly, he whispered to his generals. When dawn came, the Macedonian army advanced like a single living thing. Arrows hissed, dust rose, and again Alexander rode at the head, into the heart of the storm. He broke through the Persian center, his horse shining with sweat, his armor dented but unbroken. Darius fled once more, his army collapsing behind him. The world shifted that day. Persia, the greatest empire of its age, had fallen. That night, Alexander stood under a wide, endless sky. The fires of the battlefield burned in the distance, tiny lights flickering like dying stars. He had conquered the world that his father once dreamed of. Yet as he gazed eastward, the silence pressed upon him. He had won everything, and yet the horizon still called. The wind moved softly through the tents. The men slept, the horses dozed, and somewhere beyond the flickering fires, the conqueror closed his eyes. The war was never truly over, but for now at least, there was peace, the quiet kind that only comes between one dream and the next. The desert cools, the stars drift, the world breathes, and Alexander sleeps once more beneath the vast, endless sky. Babylon and beyond. The road to Babylon stretched far and flat beneath the sun. It was a road that had known the march of empires, Assyrian, Persian, and now Macedonian. The dust rose in lazy spirals with each step of the army. Men said little. The sound of sandals and hoofs became a steady heartbeat, soft against the earth. Babylon had been the jewel of the East for centuries. Its walls were immense, its gates carved with lions and gods, its rivers threaded with gardens that seemed to float upon the air. When Alexander approached, the city did not resist. Its gates opened slowly, silently, as though the stones themselves had grown tired of defiance. He entered not as a destroyer, but as a guest. Flowers were thrown before him. The people watched in wonder, whispering that perhaps the gods themselves had sent this young king. The scent of oil and incense drifted through the streets. Palms waved gently in the breeze, and at night the city shimmered in lamplight, gold upon water, soft music rising from distant courtyards. For the first time, Alexander paused. He explored the temples, the palaces, the ziggurats that reached toward the stars. He offered sacrifices to the local gods, blending Greek and Persian rites. He called himself King of Asia, and though his army feasted, he often withdrew to quiet chambers, speaking softly with his scholars and generals. There was talk of governance, of roads, of merging East and West into one world, his world. Yet, even amid comfort, his spirit never stilled. Eastward lay the unknown, and Alexander had never been content with maps that ended in mystery. So the march continued, through the heartlands of Persia, toward Susa and Persepolis, the old capitals of kings long dead. Persepolis lay among dry hills, proud and solemn, its columns still reaching skyward after centuries. When Alexander entered, the city was quiet, its palaces echoing with the ghosts of empires past. Treasures beyond measure filled its halls. Gold, silver, jewels, silks, carved ivory. The soldiers could hardly believe what they saw. It was said that the wealth stored there could fund 1,000 armies for 1,000 years. For a time, Alexander wandered through its courtyards, gazing at the carvings of kings who had ruled before him. He touched the stone walls and felt the weight of time. And then, one night, after a long feast, after wine and songs and dancing, the palace of Persepolis burned. No one knows exactly why. Some said Alexander ordered it in vengeance for the Persian invasion of Greece long ago. Others said a drunken whim set it aflame. But as the fire grew, he stood watching, silent, the orange glow rising into the night. The wooden beams cracked, the pillars glowed red, then white. Ash fell like snow. And when the flames died, the city of kings lay in ruin, a symbol, perhaps, of how quickly glory turns to dust. From there, Alexander pursued Darius once more. The Persian king fled deeper into the east, his empire unraveling behind him. Through deserts and mountains, Alexander followed, until at last Darius was found, betrayed by his own men, left dying by the roadside. When Alexander came upon him, the conqueror knelt beside his fallen foe. He took Darius's hand and spoke softly, promising that he would honor him as a king should be honored. Then he covered the body with his cloak. In that quiet moment, the conquest of Persia truly ended, and yet the silence it left behind was vast. The army rested, but Alexander's eyes still turned east. Beyond Persia lay new lands, Bactria, Sogdiana, and beyond them the vast mystery of India. He could not stop. His dreams were larger than any empire. The roads became rougher, the mountains rose higher, snow appeared upon their peaks,
and cold winds began to whisper through the passes. Villages became rarer, the nights were long and silent. Sometimes, when the soldiers camped by thin rivers under strange stars, Alexander would sit by the fire alone, tracing shapes in the dust, perhaps drawing maps of lands that existed only in his imagination. The march through Bactria tested them all. The people there resisted fiercely, refusing to bow to the new king. Alexander built fortresses, fought skirmishes, and married Roxana, a local princess of great beauty and quiet strength. It was said she softened his restless heart, at least for a while. Their wedding was simple, but filled with symbolism, Greek and Persian traditions woven together like the fabric of his vision for the world.
Still, even love could not slow him. He dreamed of the Indus River, of lands said to be lush and strange, filled with elephants and endless rain. And so he marched again. The journey into India was harsh. The monsoon rains came heavy and sudden, soaking armor, drowning roads, turning earth into rivers of mud. The air buzzed with insects, the jungle whispered endlessly. But through it all, Alexander pressed on, unstoppable, shining with that same quiet certainty that had guided him since Pella. At last, he faced King Porus on the banks of the Hydaspes River. Porus was tall, proud, and rode atop a great elephant. His army stood strong, the elephants trumpeting through the mist. The river was swollen and fierce, its current dark and fast. Yet Alexander, as always, refused to wait. Under cover of night and storm, he led his men across, the water rising to their chests. When dawn broke, the two armies met. The elephants charged, shaking the ground. The Macedonian phalanx bent, then held. Alexander rode again at the front, as always, his presence like a torch in the storm. The battle raged for hours, rain and mud and thunder all around. When it ended, Porus was wounded and captured. When brought before Alexander, Porus stood tall and proud. "How do you wish to be treated?" Alexander asked. And Porus answered simply, "As a king." Alexander smiled. He returned his kingdom to him and made him an ally. It was, perhaps, one of his most graceful victories, not of war, but of respect. After that, the army marched further east until they reached the edge of the world as they knew it, the Hyphasis River. Beyond it lay endless unknown lands, jungles, and mountains fading into mist. The men, weary and heartsick, refused to go further. They had marched for 8 long years, across deserts, mountains, and rivers. They wanted to go home. Alexander stood before them in silence. He could have forced them, but he did not. He walked away alone and sat by the river's edge. The water shimmered under the gray sky. For the first time, the conqueror faced a horizon he would not cross. That night, he gazed at the stars reflected in the river. He had won the world, and yet, in that reflection, perhaps he saw what he could never hold: peace, permanence, rest. The march home began soon after, slowly, quietly, as the rain whispered across the plains. The fires dim, the rain fades, The river flows. History breathes in the stillness between one dream and another.
The long return and the silent end. The way home was not the way they came. Alexander chose a path few would have dared, across the Gedrosian desert, a vast sun-bleached wasteland stretching between Persia and the sea. He wanted to chart it, to understand it, to conquer even the emptiness itself. The desert, though, was merciless. Days melted together under the endless sun. The sand shimmered like fire, blinding and cruel. Winds rose from nowhere, carrying fine dust that burned the throat and choked the breath. Men fell silently beside the road, too tired even to cry out. The water ran low. The horses grew thin. Some nights they walked by starlight, cold and trembling, just to escape the heat of the day. Through it all, Alexander stayed with his men. He walked beside them, sharing what little water remained. When a soldier found a small flask of liquid and offered it to him, Alexander poured it upon the ground, saying softly that he could not drink while others thirsted. The gesture lifted hearts for a while, but the suffering did not end. The desert took many. Weeks passed. When they finally reached the sea, the men collapsed upon the sand, listening to the slow rhythm of the waves, the first sound of peace they had known in years. Alexander watched them, silent, his eyes distant. He had crossed mountains, rivers, and kingdoms. Now he had crossed even death's threshold and returned. But something inside him had changed, something quiet, tired, and deep.
In the months that followed, he moved through Persia once more. He founded cities, reorganized provinces, and planned vast projects. Fleets, roads, bridges between worlds. He dreamed of new campaigns, Arabia, perhaps even beyond. But those dreams grew softer, like echoes fading through a long hall. He returned at last to Babylon, the city that had once greeted him with flowers. Now it was heavy with heat and the scent of reeds and oil. The Euphrates moved slowly through the heart of the city, wide and calm. Birds circled above the high towers. The people still whispered his name as he passed, though he no longer seemed to hear. In his great palace, Alexander held councils, met envoys, and spoke of plans for the future. But at night he walked alone through the hanging gardens, the air filled with the smell of damp earth and jasmine, water trickling over stones. He looked to the east, where the stars were brightest, and sometimes smiled faintly, as though remembering something far away. Then came the fever. At first it was small, a shiver, a weariness that would not fade. Then the heat grew. His skin burned, his voice weakened. The physicians came and went, whispering. The generals stood nearby, silent, uncertain. He tried to speak, but his words were faint, only fragments of thought, half dream, half memory.
Some said he spoke of new conquests, of oceans and islands waiting to be known. Others said he simply asked for rest. As the days passed, his strength faded. The air in the room was thick and still. The flicker of oil lamps made the shadows dance softly across the walls. Outside, the city continued as always, merchants shouting, children laughing, priests chanting their prayers to forgotten gods. When his soldiers learned that he was dying, they came, thousands of them, one by one, silent and bareheaded, to look upon their king. He could no longer speak, but he raised his hand faintly in greeting as they passed. Some wept, some saluted. All understood that an age was ending. He was 32 years old. He had conquered more of the world than any man before him. And yet, in the end, he lay still, like all men do. On a quiet evening in Babylon, as the lamps burned low, Alexander breathed his last. No thunder sounded, no gods descended, only the slow, soft sound of wind through the garden leaves and the steady murmur of the river beyond the walls. They said his body did not decay for days, as though the earth itself hesitated to reclaim him. His generals argued over his empire, who would rule, who would lead. The unity he had forged began to fracture. But Alexander's name, his dream, remained, drifting across centuries like dust in sunlight.
In time, his cities thrived. His culture spread across east and west. His story became legend, retold by poets, sung by travelers, painted on walls long after the marble of his statues had cracked and fallen. But in the hush of history there is another truth, that even the greatest conqueror is still human. That after all the victories, the crowns, the armies, there comes a night like any other. A night when the fire burns low, the armor rests cold, and the soul drifts quietly towards sleep. Perhaps somewhere beyond the stars, Alexander still walks, not in conquest, but in peace. No banners, no swords, only the sound of gentle wind through eternal fields. And maybe in that silence, he finally found what he could never win in life: rest. The rivers calm, the torches fade, the conqueror sleeps. The world turns softly beneath the ancient sky, and time, patient as ever, keeps its watch. After Alexander, the great king was gone, but the world he left behind still trembled with his name. In the halls of Babylon, where his body lay surrounded by perfumed oils and golden lamps, his generals gathered. Men who had marched with him across deserts and mountains now looked at one another in uneasy silence. They had followed him because he was Alexander, the one man who could bind them together. Now there was no one. Outside, the air was heavy with heat. The Euphrates drifted quietly past the city walls. The people whispered, uncertain of what would come. An empire stretched from Greece to India, yet no single hand held it anymore. The generals met for days. They argued in low voices, then louder, then in anger. Some spoke of loyalty to his unborn child, the son of Roxana, still only a promise within her womb. Others wanted power for themselves.
It was said that as they quarreled, the candles in the room burned low and flickered, as though even the light grew tired of listening. At last, they divided the empire. Each took a portion: Macedonia, Egypt, Asia Minor, Persia, Syria, Bactria. The world that Alexander had dreamed of uniting became a mosaic of ambition and mistrust. Ptolemy, his quiet, thoughtful general, took Egypt. He brought Alexander's body there, not to Macedonia, as once planned, but to the city he himself would rule. He built a tomb in Alexandria, the new city by the sea that Alexander had founded. There, the body of the conqueror was laid to rest, surrounded by marble, gold, and eternal silence. The tomb would become a wonder of the world, and later, like all wonders, it would vanish into time.
Seleucus claimed the eastern lands, the deserts and rivers of Persia and Mesopotamia. He built cities, minted coins with Alexander's face, and spoke of continuing his vision. But the unity was gone. What remained was memory, a bright flame now divided among many small fires, flickering in the winds of history. Antigonus ruled in Asia Minor, Cassander in Macedonia, Lysimachus in Thrace. They were once brothers in arms. Now they were rivals. The wars that followed, the wars of the successors, lasted for decades. Cities rose and fell. Kings were crowned and forgotten. The world that had once moved to Alexander's single command dissolved into noise. And yet, beneath the dust of time, his influence lingered. In the markets of Egypt, Greek and Egyptian voices mixed, trading words as easily as goods. In the libraries of new cities, scrolls from east and west sat side by side. Philosophers debated the stars. Artists carved statues where once there had been none. The very air of the Mediterranean world changed, as though Alexander's restless curiosity had settled over it like a gentle mist. His name was spoken in languages he had never heard. Some called him hero, some called him destroyer, others called him a god, but always he remained a figure half in light, half in dream.
Centuries passed. Rome rose, empires shifted again, but still the memory of Alexander endured, not as a man, but as a symbol of what human ambition could reach and what it could not hold. In Alexandria, the city that bore his name, scholars gathered from every corner of the world. They studied the stars, the seas, the earth. They built the great library where thousands of scrolls whispered of all the things Alexander had once longed to know. Perhaps, in some quiet way, the library was his true legacy, not his battles, nor his crowns, but the hunger for understanding that outlived him. Meanwhile, the land of Greece grew quieter. The hills where he had once ridden as a boy now stood empty in the twilight. The wind moved softly through the grass near Pella, where his childhood home still stood in ruins. The same stars shone overhead, patient, eternal. If history could sleep, this might be its dream. A young man, born in a small kingdom, rising to touch the edges of the world, then vanishing like a breath. His empire faded, his cities changed, his name endured.
Sometimes, on still nights, travelers in the deserts of Iran or along the Nile still tell stories. They say that Alexander did not truly die, that he walks the horizon unseen, his shadow blending with the wind. He carries no sword now. He commands no armies. He simply walks, watching the rise and fall of the worlds he once tried to hold.
The stars guide him, as they always did. The rivers remember him, and the earth, vast, patient, forgiving, has long since folded his footsteps into its quiet heart. The story grows faint now. The empire sleeps. The conqueror's name drifts away like mist across water. All that remains is stillness and the slow turning of time. The eternal legacy. Time is the longest empire of all, and even kings must one day kneel before it. Centuries have passed since Alexander's footsteps echoed across the stones of Babylon, or the sands of Egypt, or the mountains of India. The world he once knew has changed its shape 1,000 times. Rivers have shifted course. Cities have risen, fallen, and risen again. Yet his name still moves gently through the air, like a faint song carried on the wind. In classrooms and quiet museums, his face stares from broken statues, calm, distant, eternal. The marble is cracked, the nose chipped, the eyes blank, but still there is something in the curve of the lips, something restless and bright, a spark that has not faded. He seems to look past centuries, past the dust of forgotten empires, as though still searching for a world beyond the horizon.
Scholars read of him by candlelight. Artists paint him as both God and man. Writers imagine his dreams, and travelers stand before the ruins of his cities, whispering his name as though it might still awaken the stones. In Egypt, the city of Alexandria hums with life. The sea crashes softly against its harbor. The air smells of salt and light and old stories. Somewhere beneath those streets, it is said, his tomb still lies, lost beneath centuries of earth and rumor. No one knows for certain. Perhaps the sands themselves guard it, unwilling to let go of what remains of the world's great wanderer. But maybe, in truth, the tomb no longer matters. Perhaps Alexander never needed one. His monument is the idea that survived him, a dream of unity, of a world where the borders between peoples might fade, where knowledge could flow freely as water. That idea, soft but enduring, took root in the minds of others. When his generals built their cities, they filled them with theaters, schools, and libraries. When philosophers gathered, they spoke in Greek and Persian, in languages mingled like rivers. From these waters, centuries later, came science, art, and thought, all tracing faint lines back to the restless boy from Macedonia. And so, Alexander's true empire was not the land he conquered, but the imagination he stirred. In the deep night, when all the world is still, imagine standing on the edge of the Aegean Sea. The moonlight glides across the waves. The air is cool and clean. You can almost hear hooves on distant hills, a faint echo of horses, the murmuring of soldiers, the rustle of banners in the wind. But listen longer, and you realize the sound is not war, not conquest. It is history,
breathing in its sleep, the earth remembering, the sea whispering his name, softly, endlessly.
Alexander, a name once shouted on battlefields, now fading into a lullaby. He once believed that to be great was to rule. But perhaps greatness lies elsewhere, in being remembered not for what one takes, but for what one awakens. In every curious mind that wonders what lies beyond the map. In every traveler who gazes at the horizon and feels the pull to keep going. In every library that gathers the voices of many nations into one song. That is his legacy. Not marble, not empire, but the quiet courage to keep reaching. The night grows deeper now. The stars look down, silent and wise. Somewhere far away, in a place beyond time, a young man stands again, his cloak stirring in a warm wind, his eyes fixed on a world still waiting to be discovered. He smiles faintly, not with pride, but with peace. He has wandered long enough. The dust of the ages settles around him. The rivers run quietly beneath the moon, and at last Alexander rests, not as a conqueror, but as a story whispered to those who drift toward sleep. The world turns softly on. The dream continues, and history, for tonight, sleeps. Whispers of Alexander through time.
After Alexander's body was laid to rest, the world did not stop turning. The lands he had crossed shifted under the steady rhythm of sun and rain, wind and river. Generations came and went, the stones of his cities softened with age. The rivers flowed unchanged, indifferent to kings or empires. Yet his story remained, not in banners, not in swords, but in whispers. In the bustling marketplaces of Egypt, merchants told travelers about the boy who tamed a horse that no one else could ride. In Greek towns, teachers spoke softly of his victories, his journeys, and the strange blend of wisdom and fire that had made him remarkable. Poets, centuries later, imagined his life in words that flowed like a gentle stream, sometimes truthful, sometimes fanciful, but always carrying the echo of the man who had crossed the world. Even in Persia, where once he had defeated kings and burned palaces, children learned his name as a tale of wonder. They spoke not of fear, but of curiosity, of ambition, and of the strange courage that made a young man cross deserts and rivers in pursuit of dreams. The Romans, many centuries later, admired him from afar. They wrote histories in careful ink, recording his strategies, his cities, his ways of inspiring men. They studied the maps of lands he had traveled, tracing his path as if following the soft footsteps of a dreamer. Yet even they could not hold him. He existed between the lines, in the quiet spaces between battles and borders.
Perhaps that is the truest victory. Not in battles, crowns, or cities, but in inspiration. In the soft, patient way his life whispers through time, encouraging people to wonder, to seek, and to dream. And as the night grows deeper, as stars blink quietly over distant lands, you can imagine him walking again, not with an army, not with sword or shield, but alone, across deserts, through forests, along rivers. His cloak stirs in the gentle wind. His eyes reflect the light of countless stars. He smiles faintly, at peace, knowing that though centuries have passed, his story continues, in whispers, in echoes, in dreams. The world exhales. The stars twinkle softly, and Alexander, timeless, drifts quietly through history like a story told in the calmest of whispers. Now the story has slowed. The battles are behind you. The horses have stilled. The banners have folded. Even the mighty river of time flows quietly now, carrying the memory of Alexander across the centuries like soft water over smooth stones. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight of your body resting. Let your mind drift as the whispers of history fade into the night. Imagine the young boy in Macedonia asleep under the stars. Imagine the great conqueror standing quietly by the banks of rivers he crossed, watching the sun set on lands vast and far. Imagine the cities he built, the people he inspired, and the ideas that outlived him, all merging into a soft, endless horizon. There is no hurry, no noise, no urgency, only the gentle rhythm of your breathing and the calm presence of history settling around you.
Every step Alexander took, every choice he made, every dream he followed, it all drifts into silence now. And in that silence, there is peace. The world continues quietly, turning softly, patiently, like the slow hands of a clock in a forgotten room. Let your thoughts float like dust on a river. Let your mind wander beyond mountains, deserts, and seas. Let the stories of long ago settle in your imagination like a warm blanket. Alexander sleeps now. The world he knew rests, and you too may rest. The stars blink slowly above, the night hums softly around you, and in this quiet, gentle space you are safe, and the world is calm. Sleep, dream, drift through time as Alexander's story drifts through history. The night is yours, the world is still, and all is at peace. Alexander through the ages. The world changed. Empires rose, empires fell. Rivers shifted course, and cities crumbled into dust. The lands that Alexander had crossed were no longer ruled by him. Yet his shadow lingered, not as a sword, not as a crown, but as a whisper carried softly through time. In Greece, stories of his childhood and early triumphs became lessons for children. Teachers spoke slowly, deliberately, of a boy who rode a wild horse and tamed it. They described how he had dreamed of the world beyond the mountains and how he had never stopped moving, never stopped wondering. The students listened, eyes half closed, minds drifting, imagining the dusty plains, the blue rivers, the endless horizon. Rome learned from him. Soldiers studied his tactics. Scholars studied his maps. They admired the precision of his phalanx, the speed of his march, and the careful planning of his campaigns. Yet, even as they imitated him, Alexander remained untouchable, more dream than man, more shadow than ruler. The maps grew, the world expanded, but he seemed always one step ahead, gliding through history like a soft wind. In medieval lands, his story blended with myth. He became Alexander the Great, a wanderer of the skies, a seeker of knowledge, sometimes a magician, sometimes a philosopher. Kings claimed him as a forefather. Explorers dreamed of following his paths, mapping lands that no one in Europe had yet seen. The deserts and mountains he had crossed became part of legend, whispered in quiet monasteries, in candlelit rooms, in the minds of those who wished to see the world beyond their borders. Centuries later, in modern times, historians carefully recorded his life. Books, museums, and lectures attempted to capture the vastness of his journey. And still, he remained elusive, not entirely found, never fully understood. For the true Alexander cannot be held in facts or figures alone. He exists in the wonder he inspired, in the restless curiosity that lives in anyone who looks past the horizon and dreams. Even now, when you imagine him, you see not a battlefield, not a crown, not a map, but a man walking softly under a wide sky. His cloak stirs in the wind. The dust of centuries swirls around his feet. He pauses at a river, gazing at the water that reflects the stars above. He smiles faintly, not with pride, but with quiet contentment. Perhaps that is the final truth of Alexander. The lands he conquered crumble, the cities fade, the empires dissolve. Yet the story, slow, gentle, endless, continues to drift through history. It travels in whispers, in dreams, in quiet moments before sleep. And in that drifting, he is still there, not as a conqueror, but as a guide for imagination, not as a ruler, but as a story, not as a man, but as a soft wind moving across the plains of time. The world exhales, the stars shine quietly, and Alexander, timeless, drifts with the night, a story that never truly ends. The night deepens, the rivers flow softly, the echoes of history fade into calm. Sleep now, as Alexander drifts eternally through the quiet of time.